Hey everyone, it's George Couros. Welcome back to another episode of the Innovator's Mindset podcast highlight edition for the month of April 2025. And April 2025 was a big one for me. I actually turned 50 years old and feel really, really blessed. And it's been, this podcast has actually existed for 5 years. And when I first started it, I was actually in, basically, I would go record it in a little tiny room. I would turn the lights off. I was terrified of doing this. I would actually pick up my phone. I plugged a $10 headset into it, and I would record my thoughts. And I was so terrified of doing this, but I just wanted to learn. And I actually started, before the pandemic in North America, before COVID. And it was just because I wanted to try something new. And the reason I bring this up is I actually have a list of some of my 50 learnings that I shared in my email newsletter, and I wanted to share them. You can actually check them out in the link below as a kind of a, just a preamble before you see my wonderful guest. And one of the learnings I shared is the things you regret not learning when you were younger, you can still learn today. If you're alive, you can learn. And that is something that I really try to live my life by. I remember, I think it was a year and a half ago, I got my daughter a piano, and I got it for her, but I also got it for me because I wanted to learn piano as well. And when I was a kid, I took a few piano lessons, but never really paid attention to it, and I kind of quit. But I've always loved the piano. Some of my favorite artists are Ben Folds, absolutely love him, Keen, and it's like very piano-driven music. And I'm like, why can't I learn? So my daughter Clea and I, we learn together. George is getting more into it, and her and I will play I'm Just Ken together. It's a lot of fun. Even as recently as the last few weeks, I have started swimming. And I used to swim when I was a kid, but I never really did this. And I've always wanted to run a triathlon. And for me, it's always like, why can't I do it now? Like, I'm 50 years old. Does it matter? If I'm living, I can still learn stuff. So there's a lot of times in life, it's really easy to say, I wish I would have done that younger. Yeah, me too. There's a lot of things I wish I would have done younger. But there's no reason you can't actually start it today. Are there things that you wish you could have done when you're younger that you can start today? And I think that I'm proof of this. I didn't start this podcast because I wanted to do something different during COVID. I started because I'm always trying to learn, trying to grow. And I say this to the groups I speak to often. I'm not an expert at all. I'm just someone who's trying to learn, trying to figure stuff out. And I think if you really want to be amazing in the profession of education, you really have to continuously learn and grow. And it's not just using new technologies, but what are some of the things that you wish you'd have done when you were a kid that you can still do today that you can actually pursue? Now, I'm never going to play a concert for piano. I'm never going to win the Ironman, anything like that. But I just want to try some different things. I always want to grow because that is not only something that's important to me, but it's important my kids see as well. So again, the things you regret not learning when you're younger, you can still learn today. If you're alive, you can learn. I just saw a video, and it's amazing. And I'll share it in the link down below. There's a woman who is 100 years old, still works out of the gym, still pushing herself. She did a 5-minute plank on her 100th birthday, which is incredible because I can barely do a minute. And so feel a little competitive juices going a little bit too. But she's just the epitome of we can always get better. We can always grow. If you're still moving, you can still learn and develop. So I just wanted to share that little insight. You can actually share, see the link down below to that. Also the video that I discussed. But if this didn't help you at all, if this didn't give you some ideas, I know my guests will. Welcome back to another highlight edition of the Innovator's Mindset podcast. One of the questions I have is, so I understand obviously this is written from, the perspective of, administrators, teachers, working with students. How would you take this applying with adults? I'm curious if there's like crossover in having some of those, tough conversations. Cause I think that, there's sometimes, as administrators, teachers, colleagues, I've had some tough conversations, with, my colleagues in different roles. Any thoughts on that? Any tips that you share in your work?
Yeah, so there's a ton of crossover. And it's so funny that you bring that up because really we've been, going all over talking about this in different places and we're getting a great response. And there's always an administrator in the room who will come up after and say, "This was so great. I want all my staff to have it. But what about the grown-ups? How do I have these conversations with the other
Uh-huh.
educators that I'm supporting, right?" And so we started sharing that work as well. And the what we're finding, the similarities are you have to start with care. You have to start in that place of care. You have to listen well. You have to treat everyone with dignity. And you have to make sure that you're building trust so that when you're going to that person, they're going to listen to you.
Mhm.
And then there's a whole slew of strategies that we use to be really clear, very direct. Similar with kids, we need to be very clear in our expectation. It's not fair to hold an educator to an expectation if we're not clear about it. It's not fair to have a concern about their performance and not be really direct about the concern so they have an opportunity to turn that around. And there just isn't that much difference between how we do that with kids for behavior
Right.
and then how we do with educators to help them get better. And so, yeah, we've had a lot of fun exploring that work. And in my role now, I have a lot more opportunity to practice
Right.
that than I do talking with kids. So it's super fun.
Well, and that's the next book, like
Yeah,
also. So we've
yeah,
been
yeah.
doing a number of workshops on that, like navigating conflict with adults. And our whole thing is like we wrote our book for really busy people, for busy educators. So our style is that it's super practical. Like you can pick it up and go, this is something that I learned today that I'm going to implement tomorrow. Or if you have kids at home, that I'm going to use on my children in an hour. So
Yeah.
And it's one thing to say, like, you need to build trusting relationships. People know that. What we say is you need to do step one, step two, step three. Here's how you do it
Mhm.
so that folks can then go immediately apply.
So, like when you're talking about this, there's one. It's actually funny because I'm very good friends with this gentleman. He's a colleague of mine. We were both teaching high school at the time. He was coaching volleyball, I was coaching basketball, and he was the athletic director. And they had won. They had surprisingly won and ended up going further in the playoffs. So because the seasons overlap, volleyball is ending, basketball starting. He bumped my time, and it was like, hey, volleyball gets precedent until the season's done because you're just starting the season where we're in playoffs. So I was upset about it because I was like, geez, now I got to change everything I'm doing, like because now. And I remember complaining about him in the staff room. He wasn't there, and I was like, I can't believe he did this, blah blah blah. And so he came up to me. He said, I heard you complaining about me in the staff room. I'm like, I was. And he said, listen, if you have a problem with me, come talk to me. I'm like, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He's like, okay.
Yeah.
And it was it. That was it. Like, we're good
Yep.
friends. Like, I remember that. Whereas I've also seen silent treatment among staff. I've seen, passive aggressive stuff.
Yeah.
And I always think, about that. And like, I'm outing myself. Like, I was the one who did something wrong here. And I appreciated that he wasn't like, doing stuff. Like, it was conversation. He said what he said. I apologize. That was it. It was over, right? And I was like, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't have done that. I should have came right to you, and we could have got it solved. So there's a lot of people that are giving great solutions, finding, and creating amazing schools. I want to hear those stories. That's what I want to hear about, and like, show me what I could have when we go to this school, not like why I shouldn't go somewhere else. That to me, so I really appreciate that. I was going to say my math brain. You're like, you have 53 challenges and you had 107 contributors. So there's a little, I'm just saying, it was
Well,
almost
there
like
are
everyone
multiple
did half.
solutions for
I'm just
each
saying,
problem.
it's just like half. Do you know what I mean? I'm saying it's like you needed 106 exactly. I'm like, what happened to 107? Where you get 53, 107, right? Like you
Well,
almost like everyone got half except someone did.
the four of the authors, we also like contributed some of our own
I know.
stories.
It's
So
like
I
my own
guess
thing.
technically we're
This
at
is me.
111 if you count us
Oh,
too.
now you're just messing math up. All right, okay. Okay, so here's what I want to ask you about specifically. So I want to hone in on retention. So tell me a little bit about that chapter, maybe one of the strategies or solutions that somebody found in their own community or one that you all shared. Give me a little bit about retention so that people kind of get a preview of like what one of the chapters would be.
So first of all, every chapter starts the same way and ends the same way. We
Okay.
have a comic. Marianne's an artist. So there's a comic that, kind of takes a humorous jab at what the problem is with all the crazy stuff teachers and educators have to do.
Right.
So you start with that grounding. Then there's like an overview of the whole chapter that kind of explains what the problem is in context. And then you have each of the problems, and the problem is short, and the solution is the bulk of what's going on. So the first one, for example, is diversity, like hiring practices, making sure that we have a nice, diverse, representative staff.
This is on the retention one you're talking about?
Yes, in getting people to stay.
Yeah,
in that chapter.
Right, it's getting people to stay. And then so there's hiring practices, teacher retention, leader retention, staff retention, and student enrollment. Those are the 5 major problems that we're seeking to solve. And under each one of those problems, we have then maybe 6, like maybe anywhere between 3 and 10 solutions that fit under that heading. And one for pipeline growth is like the job. It's actually, this was before I got my job at PDK doing this. And so James Lane and John Hedren, who work with that organization, submitted stuff about the program itself and the things that they have done to help grow your own teacher pipelines in school districts, and different ways that you could cultivate students in your community. Because research suggests that most teachers work within 20 miles of where they end up teaching within 20 miles of where they actually went to school.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yep. And on our call yesterday, while we were celebrating the launch, a friend of mine, Mark Erlenwine, who is a principal at Staten Island Tech, he actually was a student there. And so was several people on his staff. So it's kind of amazing when you think about just the way that we build these really special communities that people become a part of.
All right, Alex. So this book is obviously we're facing tons of issues in education, and I really appreciate that you're really solution focused. Who should be reading this book? Like, where is the group that you're targeting? Is this for teachers, administrators, a little bit of everybody? How did you position it?
So we wrote it for the leader, but we also recognize that the leader doesn't necessarily have to have the title. So teachers in the classroom are leaders in their own right. And so we wanted to write the book so that teachers could pick it up and say, ooh, this is something I could employ in my class, with my team, with my grade level. But we also wrote it so that leaders, whether it's a principal or a superintendent, or even somebody at a state leadership level or a national leadership level, could pick it up and say, this is something that could apply across the board and this could help me. So we tried to include voices from all of those respective levels. We have teachers who are currently in the classroom. We have principals who contributed. We have superintendents who contributed. We have leaders from state organizations, from nonprofits. So we tried to bring all of those voices into the space because it's for the leader. Mm-hmm. But the leader is, if you are in education, you are a leader. In fact, even our students are leaders sometimes. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to bring that leadership lens because leadership is what helps to promote that transformative change. Mm-hmm. And it's what helps to facilitate that long-term growth. Mm-hmm. It's really kind of grounded in that growth mindset approach, where just because this is something that we're struggling with right now, that doesn't mean it has to be something we continue to struggle with. And so it's for the leader, but the leader is all of us, in our opinion, I think is the right way to say it.
We always felt like too, like teachers read up, but leaders don't necessarily read down, if that makes sense. Yep. So like I'm thinking though, like the data chapter is very applicable to teachers. There are some really solid solutions on how to use data effectively from formative and summative sort of lenses, not just at the school-wide lens, but also at the PLC level lens. And the same thing with grading practices, although we acknowledge that grading is something that is often institutionalized in schools. Every there's autonomy in classrooms. And so thinking about different ways to assess and think about student learning. And then there's our final chapter, which I think you and I were like really the most proud of. It departs is an epilogue of like a reimagining of what school can be if 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 the stars are aligned and we're able to get to those best practices for kids in those space. So like we try to imagine what that would look like for folks who could get there. And then we'll come work at that school when they make it to that.
That imagination, though, like that came from the stories that were contributed to the book about how people had solved. So we were so inspired by the way that individuals had iterated through these challenges, and we kind of took all of those, captured all of those in that epilogue, and described how all of those individuals have said, this is school. Like, this is how students learn, and this is how teachers feel valued, and this is how leadership can challenge something that's not working. And so we lovingly call it the everything guide, because we feel like it's dealing with everything.
And do you see, when you're talking about this error distraction, is this something that, this is not just about students, but like, how do we deal with this as adults? Like, how do you see that in that connection?
Yeah, you know, it's a pretty wild phenomenon what's happened to all of us. There's actually this consultant, Linda Stone, she's very famous, worked with Google, Apple, Microsoft, and she coined a term for what we're all feeling right now, George, and it's called continuous partial attention, where we give a little bit of attention to a lot of things all day long. And even when we don't have that device around us, our brain still kind of works that way, of giving a little bit of attention to a lot of things. So reading is really, it's not just exercise for the brain, but it's also very calming in getting us out of that CPA, because it's deep work, right? So would be like playing a sport would get out of that, right? Like there's a lot of things that we can do to get us out of it, but that continuous partial attention is something we're all dealing with, kids and adults alike.
Well, you know, that's like, I was thinking about this. I've always dealt, and one of the chapters you have is engaging in an anxious world. You know, AJ knows this about me probably better than anyone. You cannot talk to me until a certain time of the day because I work out. And like, I don't look at my phone. And one of the things I'm very cognizant of, I don't check my email. I don't check any social media, because it can totally set me in a totally different way. And then once I'm done the workout, I feel like way better dealing with that too. And I think it's almost like I'm training myself. There's almost a time, do you remember the iPod Shuffle, the little tiny thing, and you just clip it on? And I felt like I worked out way better then, because I never was like, I should check my email on my iPod Shuffle. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It was just, it had basically a bunch of songs. You couldn't even like pick the song. It was literally called the Shuffle, and you could press it in order, whatever order it was you downloaded, or it would shuffle. And it's just like, whatever song is coming on is coming on. So you better be picky, because it's like 84 songs, which is like amazing. 84 songs, right? And now people would laugh at how ridiculous that is, but it was like so few. So like, how, you know, when you say this, like, I'm curious about this personally, like the chapter on engaging in an anxious world. How would you talk about that with students, you know, staff? Like, what is that focus there? Because it's something I really definitely deal with.
Yeah, you know, that chapter's a lot about Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation book.
I got questions, dude. More questions coming up right away.
Yeah, you know, I get to work with people all around the country, and that book has been a very big topic. So I wanted to address it, at least in one of my chapters. And the thing is, you know, research can go both ways. So I think when that book came out and I read the first 3 chapters, I was very scared. I saw a lot of the research that he was bringing about self-harm, you know, mental health, all these different types of things that were happening to our youth, and really correlated with overuse of a phone or that kind of continuous partial attention. But when you dig into the research, a couple things actually pops up. Number one, a lot of folks were saying this is a lot of correlation. There's other things that are happening here. And the other piece is that you really can't blame the kids for it. That's my starting point for all this, George, is like, you can't blame the kids. We're the ones buying them the devices, giving them access to these platforms. Right. And so the adults, the tech companies, like the regulations that the governments have, right? These are much better places to blame, though, right?
Jonathan Haidt, like just to kind of put this, there's this Jonathan Haidt. This is what I can't get over. Okay, and this is my little. I'm sure he's a nice gentleman, right? The guy posts on social media every single day and posts nonstop. And it's like about how we shouldn't be on our phones or on social media. And like he talks about kids, and I'm like, this guy has made a ton of money. He's started a social movement by using devices and social media, but to tell people not to use it. Whereas if I felt like, hey, I did this thing, but I don't want anyone else to do this thing because only I'm smart enough to do this thing. Like it's kind of like, hey, if you really think it's so bad, don't have your phone on, don't have your book on Kindle, don't be using social media every single day. Because like I connect with you. I think it's like, how are we as adults modeling this to our kids? Not just saying, oh, those darn kids, right? Like they shouldn't be using it, but like I'm watching how people talk on social media to each other. I'm watching more adult anxiety. Like what is that step, for adults to kind of model this? Because I agree with you. It's like the kids are going to follow what we say, and what they see is like a lot of owning the other political side and all this other stuff. And I think it's like, wow, if this was two kids talking like this, we'd suspend them, but because it's adults, we cheer them on.
Yeah, and you think about like what we're modeling for kids, how they see adults interacting, as you're saying, but also just the fact that it's a part of our everyday lives. There's this big study done. There's a whole Freakonomics podcast episode that I'll give to you to put in the show notes. And basically, here's what happened in the study, George. They took all these high school and college kids, and they said, how much would we have to pay you to get rid of social media for a month? How much do you think it was?
I don't know, 10,000?
No, it was much less, right? It was anywhere.
I don't know.
It was like anywhere between $50 to $300 that they would have to pay them to get rid of it a month.
Per month?
Per month. Yeah. They're like, we can get rid of it for a month.
That's a deal.
Yeah. But something happened when they turned the research study on its head. They said, well, how much would we have to pay you if not only did you get rid of social media, but all your friends, family, everybody you know also got rid of social media for a month? And the kids actually said they would pay $30 of their own money for that.